I want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands that we're coming from. I'm on Gadigal country, part of the Eora Nation. I want to pay respects to elders past and present, and recognise, I think, the important presence of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Western Melbourne and their long-standing fight for rights for Aboriginal people in that area, led from that area. So my name is Lisa Folkes. I'm the Director of Employment Programs at Social Ventures Australia. In a minute, we'll go on to hear a bit about this research. The format for today's discussion is we'll get a presentation from Jonathan Finnegan, who's from SVA Consulting, on the research itself. And then we'll have a panel discussion with Trent Miller, who's an expert in this area at Youth Projects, Executive Manager of Social Enterprise Employment and Training, probably got that wrong, and Shani Lee Tolliday, who's a young person who has gone through her own experiences of trying to get a journey to decent work and has actually stepped in because our original panellist wasn't available. So we're very grateful to Shani for stepping in. But I want to give you a little bit of background on why we have done this work. So one of the things that what we realise about the labour market, but maybe not enough people do, is that it is much tougher today for young people to get into good quality jobs than it was in my generation, in parents' generation. In fact, the Grattan Institution has said that today's young people are at risk of being the first in memory to have a worse standard of living than their parents. So we have a real challenge about how we make sure young people are able to achieve good quality work, and for those who are born into poorer backgrounds to use that as a way of improving their position. One of the key ways that Social Ventures Australia engages is by working directly with employers so that they can look at their own practices and have a think about how those practices might either create opportunities for young people from less privileged backgrounds or how they might be locking those young people out. And one of the key planks of this work that we do with employers is to have it informed by the voices of young people themselves. So in order to do this work, we need to understand what young people in the area that we're looking at actually experience when they go to work, so that employers, when they're thinking about how they create opportunities, are doing that from a base of understanding what's going on. So because we just recently launched our first ever Employer Innovation Lab, so that's the lab where we work with employers on these issues, we just launched that in Western Melbourne. In order to inform that, we asked our colleagues in Social Ventures Consulting to talk with young people in Western Melbourne about their experience of work. So we think that's got a lot of insights for employers, but it's also got some insights for policymakers and for practitioners in this area. So I will hand over to Jono Finnegan to take us through that research, and then we'll come back, we'll talk about it, and we'll also open up for questions from you. Thank you. Jono.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this afternoon over your lunch break. So my name is Jonathan. As Lisa said, I work in the SVA consulting team, and I had the chance to work with Lisa and George and the team in conducting this research with young people in Western Melbourne. I'm going to give you a very quick run through of some of the key things that we heard from young people through this research. The report is complete and will be shared shortly after this webinar. So I'm going to go through the findings pretty quickly before we hear more from Trent and Shani Lee as well. So first of all, what did we do? So we spoke with 24 people in Western Melbourne. Youth Projects were very kind to let us use their venues to speak with young people at their Youth Project sites in Sunshine, Melton and Werribee. We managed to capture quite a diverse sample of young people in these interviews. So about 45% were male, 45% identified as female, 9% were other gender or did not disclose, 14% identified as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, about a third are living with a disability, and almost half have a mental health condition. And 3/4 were unemployed and looking for work at the time. 80% currently working in a really wide range of jobs and sectors. And of those who are unemployed, a range of periods out of work. So about a third had worked in the last 6 months. There was a small portion who had worked 6 to 12 months ago, and then 23% more than 12 months ago. And then there were a couple of people who'd never had a paid job before that had done internships, but had never had a paid job. In the interviews with the young people, we talked about a number of different things to understand their experiences of work today. I wanted to share 3 themes today around recruitment, their experiences of work, and their experiences of supervisors as well. In terms of recruitment, some of the experiences that young people shared were frustration around a lot of job advertisements requiring 12 months or 2 years of experience, which they felt was incredibly challenging for young people who have just come out of high school looking for their first job. And that was one of the most common comments that we heard from the people who we spoke with, was this frustration about the expectations for very entry-level roles that didn't seem fair. Many young people spoke about employers being very uncommunicative, not responding to job advertisements, not providing any kind of feedback or responding to queries about where is the process at, when will we hear back from people. And we heard some young people talk about how it's just really hard to even get someone to call you, someone to talk to you about a job that you apply for. Very frustrating. We also heard people complain about unclear and inaccurate job advertisements that are dishonest about the requirements of the role, or they use unclear language that makes it harder to understand what is the job, what's involved. We also heard a number of young people talk about how they feel like they just don't shine through in online screening calls and interviews in a way that they do with face-to-face calls. And also feel that face-to-face interviews provide an opportunity to see the workplace firsthand, to get a sense of if you're going to get along with the manager, and see manager and staff interactions as well. This is particularly important since the COVID world and the shift to online as well. In terms of people's experiences of work, we heard stories of some young people having not being paid for overtime or being paid cash in hand below minimum wage. This is not uncommon. We also heard stories of some young people having unfair decisions made around the allocation of shifts. A lot of the people who we spoke with were on casual roles with rosters of shifts, and examples of some of these stories were one young person, when they turned 18, they suddenly stopped getting shifts. We heard stories of perceived favoritism amongst managers, so that some shifts, some people got the best shifts, so those that were paid higher or better hours. We heard young people talk about being treated like a number in some workplaces, and that means not being allowed to take sick leave when they're injured, even though they have a doctor's note, being discouraged from taking toilet breaks and looking after themselves, employers not checking in with them to see how they are. And we also heard some stories about unsafe workplaces, whether that was incredibly hot warehouses that were not ventilated correctly. There was one young man I spoke to who fainted and had to be taken to hospital. He passed out while working in a warehouse. We heard about very slippery floors, really cluttered workplaces, really unsafe environments for people to work in. In terms of supervisors, we heard stories about really bad supervisors, but also some really positive stories as well, which was great to hear. What we tried to distill in the report was as an idea of what do these young people say a great supervisor looks like. And there are 3 key things that came out from these conversations. First was that great supervisors adopt what we could call a growth mindset towards making the mistakes. So when a young person makes a mistake, They don't fuss over it. They know that when you're in your first job, when you're early in your career, you're going to make mistakes. And mistakes are part of the learning process. That they take the time to take that young person through the thing that where they made a mistake and learn how to do it better. We heard that great supervisors are understanding and supportive. They're understanding of how to respond if someone has a panic attack or is having a really hard day at work, having some understanding about how to respond to that and how to support them. And also that they're really approachable and build rapport and friendly and can be approached by people to have difficult conversations. The report has many quotes in it from the interviews that we conducted. And some of those stories are around things such as these. So around the frustration of just finding someone to actually reach out to you when you're applying for jobs. And as well as stories about how some of these negative experiences really made young people want to turn away from particular sectors or roles where they saw themselves having a career in the future. There's a lot more in the report to go through. I want to talk about two areas of recommendations or suggestions for employers that came out from the conversations with young people. So the first is around how can they improve recruitment. The second is what can employers do to make great workplaces. In terms of improving recruitment, there were 6 suggestions that young people had. So the first was reconsidering minimum experience requirements, which roles actually require 2 years of experience, and actually having a commitment to bring on board young people with less experience and build them up and educate them about how to do these roles. The second was being responsive and transparent around the length of recruitment processes, being responsive to communications. The third suggestion was to offer in-person options during the recruitment process. As I said before, some young people said that their self really shone through much better when they were in person. And there's a lot of advantages for both the employer and the job seeker when interviews are done in person, and that's possible. The fourth suggestion was around being honest and clear in job advertisements. Don't use unclear language. Be honest about what are the requirements, what are the wages, what are the expected hours. Be inclusive was around helping young people feel like, even in the recruitment process, that it's a workplace where they want to work, where they will feel welcome. So one example was having pride flags up in an office so that people who are LGBTQIA will feel accepted and that this is a place that I want to work, that I feel comfortable coming to apply for a job. And then the last one was advertising jobs where young people will see them. Social media is important, places like TikTok, Instagram, etc. Some of the stories around this, a really common refrain we heard was to just give people a chance to have an interview or get back to them when they apply. And as I said, there was one young person who talked about wishing everything wasn't online and that they found it very difficult to apply for jobs in person in their local plaza because everything had moved online now. So keeping open those options for young people is really important. Finally, in terms of recommendations to what makes a great workplace. So the first was a work culture that's respectful and supportive, that if you need to go to a doctor's appointment, they will support you to do that. It's not rocket science. It's not really asking for much, but it's so important, and it's a real right as well. The second, that employees are remunerated fairly. They're remunerated for the work that they've done in line with award wages. That employees have opportunities to learn and develop. That they're where it's possible, there's a diversity of roles, and they are supported to learn on the job. Young people also want to work in businesses that are well run. They want to learn from their employers and their colleagues about how to do this job well. Some of the young people who we spoke with were really frustrated about their experiences at workplaces where customers were not treated well, and that it just made them want to run a mile. They didn't want to work there and stay there. Finally, the employees feel like they belong. They want to work somewhere where they feel accepted. They feel like they're welcomed at work, that their colleagues are people who they want to spend time with as well. And supervisors play a really important part in that. I'll leave you with two final quotes before handing back to Lisa. And these two quotes from these two young women were around stories of supervisors who had done really well. And I think the top one is particularly powerful, where she said that I wish everybody had worked at a place with this type of environment because my supervisors were just so nice. And I guess one of the key overall findings from the research was just the important role that supervisors play in creating a great workplace and experience for young people. So that's it. That's all I wanted to share today, and I'll be hanging around for questions. I'll hand back to Lisa now.
Thanks so much, Jono. If you would like to ask a question either of Jono or any of the panelists, please put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them when we have the panel discussion, and there will be time to have those questions. As I said, one of the primary uses of this research is to help employers start to try to stand in the shoes of young people in their area. And one of the things that we do to complement the documents, the research, is actually do interviews with young people. So 4 young people in Western Melbourne who were participants in the research agreed also to be interviewed on video. And we're just going to show you a short extract of that video now, so you get a bit of a flavour for what they said.
It's kind of hard to find employment. It's been going on for a while, like I'd say like almost 2 years. Been trying to like sort of upskill, and I wish just like, you know, simply employers could give me a chance, you know, because like I've been working so hard.
I typically apply for jobs every day, and then almost every single time they're like, you're not qualified enough, or like, we're not hiring at the moment, and that can be really frustrating. But the most frustrating thing is not hearing back from them. The least you could do is email and say, hey, sorry, but we're not looking for workers at the moment. I used to work at a fast food chain for 6 months in 2021. I had to quit though because they did not give me work for a whole month. They didn't train me as much as they should have. And it was just really frustrating because I would get yelled at for the simplest things. And it was just like, well, you didn't teach me how to do it, so.
Yeah, a lot of the time they would trust in the older employees to do something and never give the young employees a chance to learn or prove that they can do those things. A good way they could have improved that situation was just basically just giving the younger people more opportunity to prove themselves and just to educate them. Even having the older employees educate us.
Workers would like bully each other and nobody would say anything. A lot of my experiences, it was very much like racial bullying, and I would have nobody to turn to because I didn't know who to speak to about these type of things. And it would just be them either making fun of my hair, making fun of the way that I talk, or just outright calling me a monkey. That hit. I don't think anyone that was either like a supervisor or manager ever like stepped in to tell anyone to like, can you tone it down at least? Or can you like keep that outside of work? Like, even if they just said, keep that outside of work, that would have been appreciated. But no, it was very much, the situation was put on me to fix. And I wasn't equipped to fix it whatsoever. There's so many things employers could do. There's so many. Like, for instance, training supervisors and managers on the impact of certain behaviors. and how it can cause a toxic work environment. And just because one person is complaining, it doesn't mean that facing the issue is not going to cause a positive outcome for everyone.
You know, a good environment makes good, people, or good people makes a good environment.
I think one thing employers can do to make their workplace overall better is checking in with young people. It may be like a job that they're only needing for like 2 to 3 years, but actually ask them, actually encourage them and build connections with them so they have like at least a safety net when they're like, okay, I don't want to work here anymore. You can refer them to a place where they might be more comfortable.
I guess the way they could improve with their recruiting and stuff is nowadays a lot of it's online, and you lose that that like face-to-face connection. As a lot of people with anxiety get scared of that, it's also a good thing because you're able to get a read on the other person that could be hiring you, and they can get a read on you of what type of person you are. Yeah, so like doing it over the phone and stuff is always very, very frustrating in my experience.
Young people, they're still growing and learning to be mature adults, and being the role model that they can look up to is very important because they need positive role models to show them how to lead, especially in the workplace.
At the end of the day, we're all human beings. You've been in the position I'm in at the moment. Just treat each other with respect and not a number, and that's all you'll need to have a successful workplace.
Hey, so I'll now bring in our panel. So Shani, Trent, and also Jono, perhaps you can reveal. So I want to introduce, you've met Jono. I want to introduce Trent Miller, who is the Executive Manager, I'll get it right this time, Trent, Employment Training and Social Enterprise for Youth Projects. And Shani Lee Tolliday, who is a young person who can introduce herself, but also also works at Youth Projects. So look, I guess I wanted to kick off by asking each of you to perhaps initially just tell us a little bit about yourself, but also any reflections having just seen that video and heard what Jono said about the research. Shall I start? I'll start with you, Shani, since you're unmuted.
Yeah, so my name's Shani, lovely to meet you. I'm 23 years old. I was lucky enough to have a opportunity at Youth Projects and be hired doing reception, which I absolutely love. There's a lot of passion behind it. But yeah, I did get a bit teary through those videos due to I can completely understand. I've gone there, been there, and unfortunately experienced a few of those things happening at other workplaces that I've worked at in the past. So yeah, like it's definitely great to hear a lot of young people participating to be able to speak up, and thank you all for listening and letting us be heard. Yeah.
Trent.
Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm the Executive Manager of Youth Projects, Employment Training and Social Enterprise Portfolio. For those that don't know, Youth Projects is an independent registered charity that provides frontline support to young people experiencing disadvantage. It could be anything from unemployment to enduring poor mental health to supporting with their disability, homelessness. Our employment projects are centered around our 3 Western Melbourne state-of-the-art youth hubs. They were co-designed with young people and opened in the middle of 2022. They're located in Sunshine, Werribee and Melton. If you're interested, I would welcome anyone to come out and visit. Please feel free to get in touch. I think, yeah, from our experience across Western Melbourne alone, we serviced over 2,000 young people in the last financial year. Unfortunately, the need for our services is growing. Young people are facing more complex challenges, youth unemployment is increasing, and underemployment still remains a huge challenge. I think giving you those figures is why we were very excited that we heard SCA's Employer Lab was coming to Western Melbourne. We don't think there's enough programs that focus on the demand side of the labour market. And we see real opportunity in SCA working collaboratively with organisations to help shift the dial of how they're doing their current recruitment. I think the research with young people, you know, it's not overly surprising to us. We live and breathe this on a daily basis. I think kind of my overarching understanding of the research is that young people really aren't after a lot. They want to be treated the same as any other employee. And most of that really comes down to basic human rights. I think, you know, having said that, you know, it's not all negative. There's some good practices highlighted, and it's nice to be part of an event like this where we can, you know, share examples and explore how they can be integrated into other workplaces.
Yeah.
Want to just highlight one area. So the data tells us that on average, after young people leave full-time education, whatever form of education, on average it takes over 2.5 years before they get their first full-time ongoing job. And it's really easy to reel off that statistic, but 2.5 years or more than 2.5 years is quite a long time, particularly if you're reliant on Centrelink benefits or you've got casual intermittent incomes over that period. So I guess I'm really interested in hearing from you both about what is the impact of that? What does that look like? Because that's the average too. So some people are obviously, you know, take longer and some people take shorter. So what's the impact of that long period of underemployment or unemployment on young people?
I know, like from my experience when I was out of employment, I was in a bad accident and I was struggling to find employment. It was during COVID as well, so there wasn't much opportunities happening. It was after about 3 months, I actually felt like I started gaining a lot more mental health issues. There was a lot more problems going on too. So being reliant on settling, trying to push me, as well as having to go to the appointments for looking for jobs. And unfortunately, there's a lot more than that going on behind the scenes. There's making sure that there's a house over your roof over your head, and it could be quite difficult maintaining that on settling payments as well. So you're kind of stuck catch-22, and if you do kind of lose a roof over your head and you don't have an employment, there's a massive barrier. You kind of need the job to keep the roof over your head, and then to have the roof, to keep the job, you need a roof over your head so you can shower, sleep, and rest. So I felt like that would probably be the biggest impact of the unemployment, as well as losing the confidence, as you heard a lot of young people said in that last presentation. You lose their confidence. It raises anxiety, stress, losing motivation, and feeling unheard, unwanted, and like there's no place that are going to take you in. It really attacks you, and insecure like also causes stress, anxiety, a bit of depression. You get less productive because you're knowing that this isn't full-time. Say, for example, Christmas casuals, it can be quite hard because it's like a little bit of a taste, and then no, we don't need you anymore, and not gaining any kind of support, or even like just a bit of feedback from employers as well when doing little casuals like that, really help improve and build the confidence into finding another employment. That's you, Trent.
Good answer, Shani. Yeah, and I mean, the problem is actually getting worse. You only have to look back that since the global financial crisis, the unemployment disparity between young people and other age groups continues to grow wider. Today, 20% of the young people looking for work who've been unemployed for more than a year, which has doubled from the rate a decade ago. I think, you know, as Shani was kind of mentioning, the financial stress, it's not only now, but it also impacts your career later. There's many studies that show extended periods of early unemployment lead to permanently lower wages. If you look at right now, the cost of living's gone up for everyone, and you can only imagine how it's impacting young people that are on income support or potentially don't receive any benefits at all. We've got young people that present to our youth hubs with empty stomachs, fleeing domestic or family violence, you know, wondering where they're going to sleep at night. And obviously without an income, it's pretty challenging to fix these things.
Yeah. One of the questions, I think we don't talk enough about the issue of poverty and homelessness. I mean, Trent, what sort of proportions of young people who come through on your transition to work program, for example, might experience housing instability?
Yeah, so we recently just conducted our annual client engagement survey, and within that, 37% of young people identified their housing being at risk, and that could be a multitude of factors, but that's direct feedback coming from them, and that's how they feel about their current living situation.
So that uncertainty, so I mean that's a pretty terrible number, and imagine as Shani said, the impact of that on your ability to look for work and present. And I guess, interested in reflections from the two of you on what then that looks like to an employer. So when a young person, goes to apply for a job and they're presenting to an employer, I think, what we saw from the research is that many of them have had pretty terrible experiences in former work, sometimes very unsafe. We heard terrible example of racial bullying, but also I think you're both describing a situation of being quite insecure in terms of housing and perhaps having an empty stomach. I mean, what for an employer who's, this person's just rocked up to an interview, what do you think they might see, or how that might affect people's presentation to employers?
That's a good one. Look, I don't know, it's a bit hard. I suppose that risk, maybe they're feeling unsettled to take the risk of taking on a young person that hasn't got stable housing. But as discussed a lot previous, and that works with a lot of different situations, having that opportunity can really make a massive impact in that young person's life for now and future, as Trent said earlier. Like the longer without the unemployment, not enough training, and if you're not on any benefits, you're not able to gain support. There's not much support around education without financial things coming in either way as well. So really being uneducated, no employment and no housing, it's just horrible.
Yeah, I think if you look at anyone who's experienced underpayment, discrimination, unsafe work conditions, of course it's going to have a significant impact on the way that they view employment. Negative experience will make young people wary of new job opportunities. They're going to approach job applications or new roles with skepticism. They're less likely to trust potential employers. Not to mention their confidence. Experiencing underpayment or discrimination can ruin that, because it's almost putting you below what is legal, right? I think, it impacts their career choices as well. There was an example that Jono gave of a quote, who dreamed of being a chef, but because they've had this one poor experience, have now shelved that because they're so traumatized by their experience. And then that has a multiplier effect, because they go and talk to their friends, they talk to their family, and they speak about that industry and the way it was, and it could potentially be ruining a young person's dream of finding a role within the sector that they initially thought they wanted to, because of one poor experience.
Definitely.
Yeah. So one of the questions that's come through on the Q&A, and I really encourage people to put questions through on Q&A, was around youth wages. And I guess the question to you, Jono, whether anyone talked about youth wages or traineeship or apprenticeship wages through the research?
That didn't come up specifically. There were stories certainly around pay being withheld, young people not being paid for overtime that they had done, and also just being paid below minimum wage and cash in hand. But the question of junior wages or youth wages didn't come up specifically.
It's interesting. So I know that in other work that we've done, one of the issues that comes up often is around apprenticeships and traineeships, and young people being unwilling or unable to take them on because of how low the wages were. And even though they might want the skills and they might want that pathway, actually the immediate option is to do labouring or to do something where they get maybe a casual loading because just the maths, even though they know in the long run they'll be better off. Interested, Trent, to hear whether that's something that you see, or if you've got any thoughts on this issue about wage rates, including junior wages.
Yeah, for sure. I think, it's a inclusive and collaborative effort. When we've got young people who are shunning away from apprenticeships, we talk about the long-term benefit of actually getting a qualification and potential short-term pain for long-term gain, and linking up with other support services. There's so many different government programs that are out there that can support you if you're willing to seek that level of help. And a lot of the young people aren't going to know about those programs, so it's up to services like us to communicate where those opportunities really lie. We have had experiences with employers where they have had young people working as labourers, and they could have done that for 6 months, and then that young person flags that, hey, I actually wouldn't mind doing a career within this. And if they've proven themselves and they're making the output of what someone would be at their labouring wage, and sometimes employers will come to the party with that. I think the long-term rewards for employers, which is kind of linking to one of the other questions in the Q&A, is that young people are going to be invested in your organisation. They will stick it out. They'll be reliable. Put yourself in their shoes. The first time that you had a job where you had a supervisor, an employer that really believed in you, you stuck by them. You were there for a long time, and your output would have been far more significant to your business than what it would have been had you have kind of towed the line with what's legal and what's right.
I think I'd add to that, Trent, that I think that a lot of the recommendations that young people made in these conversations would involve changes in the business that would benefit everyone, not just the young people. So if we're talking about employees being remunerated fairly, being in a business that's well run and looks after its customers, a work culture that's respectful and supportive, all of these things are going to benefit everyone, not just young people coming in. And by increasing retention of the workforce and making it just a better business. Yeah.
I might actually add to that too. Having experience in workplaces and providing different trainings, I found it very a lot more easier to juggle the work and training when training was provided by the company. So like internal training and also mental health support. So having EAPs in the company really help if there isn't anyone to kind of chat to. At the time, at least, they've got that opportunity to have some support around their mental health, which is very important.
Yeah, I think one of my reflections on this question, so one of the questions that came through in the Q&A was, what's the benefit for my business if I employ these young people? And I think one of my reflections, as you guys have said, and I think Jono said, is, yeah, these asks are pretty modest. People are asking to be treated like a human being, to be listened to be have check-ins, as you say, Shani, to be trained to do the job that they're being asked to do. We in the Employer Lab, we work with employers to bring young people into their organisation and to give them good quality jobs. And one of the interesting things is also the unexpected benefits. So, one of the employers that we worked with reported that not only did they bring young people in who then took up apprenticeships that they were really struggling to fill, they got young women coming into some of those apprenticeships where they'd never had women before. So that was this quite significant sort of shift in the organisation by changing the way they recruited. But they also found that beyond the immediate group of supervisors and buddies that they'd set up to support these young people, there are a whole bunch of other people in the organisation who came forward and said, I can help mentor and support, and became much more engaged in the project. So I think there is something around, I guess, many of us want to see a better future for young people in our country, and the opportunity sometimes to pass on our skills, to provide support, to mentor, to buddy in the workplace is actually an opportunity that can be very engaging for the workforce that aren't directly involved in the project. So the unexpected benefits have been really interesting through these changes. And so, yeah, I really think there are those really tangible benefits, but also just that interesting thing about bringing back the idea that workplaces can be people where we can help people become their best selves and grow with the business. So, look, I wanted to ask you, Trent, I was going to ask you, you work with lots and lots of young people across Western Melbourne. I guess interested in if there are other things or there are things that you think employers need to be more aware of that are going on for young people in the background. So, things that may not be obvious to employers, or perhaps some assumptions that they might have about the young people that you work with.
Yeah, I think with this question, it's probably just as equally to address what challenges young people will face really in that early stages of employment. When they're coming from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, they're probably not going to have the resources for things like transportation, appropriate work attire, other necessities. Maybe it's a short course or a license that needs to be out there. But I just want to reiterate that there are supports out there available for young people and employers to access, to tap into programs like ours, where we can subsidise for these items. It upsets me dearly when we have young people who come back into our office and they've informed us that they've lost their job because of an issue that would have been very easily solvable had it been brought to our attention earlier, either through a young person or an employer. You have to acknowledge that young people are going to come with limited work experience. But yeah, we've spoken about recognising the potential in young people and giving them on-the-job training, exploring traineeships. There are financially viable ways where a young person can actually make a return on investment for your business. Yes, we definitely care about young people and want good for them, but you need to benefit as an organisation as well. I think it would be remiss if I didn't mention cultural diversity when we talk about the Western Melbourne. Employers, be culturally sensitive, be aware of the unique backgrounds and experiences that young people will bring to the workplace, but take the angle of being curious. Don't treat cultural diversity as a taboo topic. I think once you do ask the right questions and come at it from a curious angle, you'll probably find that you have a lot more in common with their backgrounds than they initially thought, and it will help you understand that young person and why they might act in the way that they really do.
Yeah, did you want to add anything on that one, Shani?
No, I think Trent covered it quite well. Definitely, yeah, like I've mentioned a few times, but having the training there at the workplace really comes in handy. So having like a good structure when walking into a new workplace as well. Sometimes it may look like that when you're in the interview and then you get in and things are a bit all over the place and you're maybe sometimes in training mode and left unattended and simply making a couple of mistakes and boom, you've lost the job. So having that support from the managers as well as the company and making sure that there's training there and if there's anything that we can help in, we're definitely there. As Trent said earlier, we're quite eager, we're ready to come in, we're here to support. Just giving us that opportunity and having the guidance there as well really helps us build a good relationship between the employer and ourselves and helps us build the confidence. So we're definitely going to come back the next day. As I have felt with this place at Youth Projects, there's a lot of passion that I have at the workplace, and it helps me get up every single day. I've got so much support from executives, managers, employees. It's absolutely amazing, and it changes a whole perspective of a workplace. I've never actually experienced a workplace like this before, and it's very hard for people to believe when I speak to other young people. So yeah, no, it would be great to see other places run like this. Yeah.
I don't want this to turn into too much of a...
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I don't want this to turn into too much of a love fest for Shani, but this youthful enthusiasm is a classic example. Lisa mentioned at the start, we had a different young person who was supposed to be on the panel today, but unfortunately couldn't make it for personal reasons. And I think I spoke to Shani at maybe 12:20 for a 1 p.m. webinar start. And before I could even get out of my mouth, did she want to participate? She'd already said yes. And, you know, that's the sort of energy that young people can bring. I know in my shoes now, if someone asked me 40 minutes before a webinar without any prep or knowledge of the topic, I'd say, I won't say what I would say, but I think you get the picture.
Definitely. And it's the experience, like the opportunity. And I thank everyone here for having me as well. Like it's something amazing. And then I can go off and tell my young people, or friends, that like this experience I had, it's gobsmacking. Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, because you also see the reverse, right? The poor work experiences. You have people who are disengaged and deeply unhappy. And I think, you know, so it's we have a question, but which we might be able to come back to at the end around what a great workplace is. I think, Shani, you've talked about a lot of those things in the great workplace, but I wanted to get into a couple of the other questions from the audience. So one of them is around the role of social enterprise and what the role might be of social enterprise in providing safe and inclusive workplaces for young people, perhaps before they move into other jobs, into the mainstream employment. So Trent, since social enterprise is in your title, you might want to have a crack at this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see social enterprise getting so much traction with policymakers. We think it's got a massive role to play, and especially as we're seeing all of this data around young people being out of a job for longer term. So I think social enterprise's key role to play really is with young people who are furthest from the labour market for whatever reason, but really having a good soft light touch where they've got holistic supports around them. There's some fantastic social enterprises that do amazing work with young people at getting them from A to B before then potentially transitioning off into open employment.
Yeah, I think there's also an opportunity for other employers to partner with social enterprises as well. Because I think one of the things we've got to be careful with around social enterprise is that we don't let social enterprise bear the, you know, we don't expect that everyone will be able to get that opportunity and all the support they need in social enterprise. And most young people will go into other forms of employment. So we've sort of need to learn from the great practices that social enterprises have, and also really encourage employers to look to social enterprises to partner with, to create that pipeline of talent, to use a terrible HR expression. One of the other questions is there's a big focus on diversity, inclusion, and something which is B, and I don't know what that is. Sorry, anonymous attendee, but you know that I just
belonging.
Confess. Belonging. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jono. That's so. Do we think that young people should be included in that conversation, and is that something that we think might be included in the future?
Sorry, I missed that question that you read out.
So it's about a lot of employers, and particularly larger employers and public sector employers, have diversity and inclusion strategies. So they have specific strategies to bring people in from diverse ranges of backgrounds and to make sure they feel included in the workplace. I guess I'll comment on this, having just actually come off a meeting with a large employer in Australia who is probably one of the most sophisticated in thinking about social mobility. So how do you create opportunities for young people from poor backgrounds to get somewhere, to get really great jobs and progress? And the person we were talking to basically said, look, we're trying to have a conversation about the role of coming from a poorer background on people's employment prospects. And in Australia, that conversation isn't being had. So it's being had in the UK. There's a lot of conversation about class and what that means for people's employment prospects. In the US, there's some really recent stuff about the American dream and, you know, the idea that you can do better than your parents, you can work your way to a better life, and how that is coming unstuck we're not having that conversation. So I think what I would say is that, and you know, it's probably worth noting that Diversity Council of Australia, when they did surveys of people's feeling of inclusion, so they surveyed 3,000 employees across the country, and when they asked them about self-identified social class, it was that factor more than any other that predicted whether they felt included or not. So it's really interesting because it's for something that we don't talk about. There are people who clearly can see the difference between their feeling of comfort and belonging and inclusion in a workplace and others, and are feeling like they're covering up or that is leaving them behind. So I think it is a really important area. And the reason I connect it with young people is because I think that part of what we hope the promise of Australia is, and is that if you go to work, no matter what the job is, if you go to work and you apply yourself, that you will be able to earn enough to have a decent life, have a house, have a family, if that's what you want. That's sort of the promise. And what the data tells us is that for young people, particularly those from areas like Western Melbourne, who come from poorer backgrounds, that promise isn't being upheld. So I very strongly believe it should be in the agenda, but we've got a long way to go to put it on the agenda. Trent, did you want to comment on this one?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've been in the sector for over 10 years, not showing my age, but what I've found is that there is a bit of momentum towards improving the lives of young people, particularly from larger corporate organisations that definitely didn't exist a few years ago. And I think, you know, it's twofold. It's because they're needing to think around how they recruit their future workforce. Unemployment is still at record lows and people need to open up new avenues for that. But I think there is a genuine care there now. You know, there's a lot of good work going on with the sustainability development goals, and organisations realise that youth play a big part in that. So they're understanding that it is good practice to be involved with that. So yeah, we do have a fair few more corporate partnerships than we previously did. And some of those are thought out by us, and some are organisations coming to us, which, you know, I never thought would be the case 2 years ago. So it's nice to see some of that narrative changing, but still a lot more work to be done in the whole DEI and belonging. I didn't know that was part of the acronym either, but yeah, so I've learned something.
Look, I'm conscious of the time, so I wanted to give each of our panellists and contributors a chance for any final reflections or thoughts. Jono, did you want to make any reflections or bring anything out in the research that you perhaps want to in this final piece?
I think a real big takeaway for me was about the importance and the impact of supervisors on young people, and that a great supervisor can make a difficult job either more tolerable or actually enjoyable and a really good learning experience, and that a really bad supervisor can make a job that looks like something good on paper just terrible. And some of the stories that young people shared were of how the negative experiences they had in a sector made them want to go away from it. They didn't want to work in that sector at all, not just leave that employer. So I think that's a real kind of key takeaway for me from these conversations, and one that resonates with my own work experience if I look back over the many years I've been in the workforce. So yeah.
Actually, unfortunately, had some bad experience around hospitality, and I've heard that before in this chat. So I agree on that one.
Any other thoughts, Shani? Any other final reflections or things you'd like our audience to hear?
Yeah, just pretty much everything that we've kind of gone over. And yeah, exactly what Jonathan said, making sure that there is some great supervisors on board in the organization to be able to provide that best quality training and outlook on the company as well. I mean, not only is that young person having to leave your company, if it's on a bad note, it's not just going to be, unfortunately, your company, it might be an effect on all that industry, which isn't great. Unfortunately, as I just discussed, I had the poor experience in hospitality. It was at multiple different places, and it was just unfortunate for myself. But it's definitely something that I've been able to use in my other jobs, some of those skills. So it's for like the communication with customers and making coffees. But yeah, no, it'd be great to kind of see some improvement in those sectors as well. And yeah, seeing some great changes would be really nice for us young people and other young people that we're catering at youth projects to be able to have the experience. I'd love to see some of our great, beautiful young people go out there and get an opportunity to be one of the employees.
Yeah. Great. And Trent, any last thoughts?
No, I just want to thank everyone for attending, and particularly thank SBA for this piece of work. This stuff we often don't get to do, so it's great to have an independent organisation come in and really commit to this type of work. And I know that it's been funded multi-year, and that's so critical for our sector. Often when projects gain momentum and they can see they really work, the funding is no longer there, and it's supposed to be financially sustainable, but it's not really feasible to do that. So I'm really excited to see where this project goes, and I'll be following it very closely.
Fantastic. Well, and so I want to thank our panelists. All three of you have done, partly Shani also just stepping up at the last minute, but you've done an enormous amount to support this project, which is fantastic. I also want to thank our funders. As Trent said, it's really important to have backers for this sort of work, which is really trying to understand what's going on. So Macquarie Group Foundation and Paul Ramsay Foundation have funded this work. And they've enabled us both to do the research and also to pursue this long-term strategy around working with employers to try to make a difference. In terms of next steps, if you are from an employer organisation, or if you know of employers that might be interested in looking at how they can open up opportunities for young people from less privileged backgrounds, we want to hear from you. We're doing more labs. We really want to work with those organisations, so please get in touch. If you've got case studies of terrific employers, obviously Youth Projects has got good rap out of this webinar, but case studies of good employers. I think we're always looking for examples of where employers do this really, really well. And then also in terms of the coming along for the journey. So our ambition is to see more employers creating great quality jobs for young people, particularly those from less privileged backgrounds. And if you or your organisation are also keen to be part of that, again, please get in touch. So finally, thank you very much for your time and for your questions and your engagement, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks all.